Hello, and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast where we explore the intersection of culture and commerce. I am Brian.
I'm Philip. Today we have a very special guest, the venerable Orchid Bertelsen, who's taking over guest hosting duties over at the Infinite Shelf podcast for this season, but also holds the prestigious role of Chief Operating Officer at Common Thread Collective. Welcome to the show. I was going to say back to the show. This is the first time you're actually on the Future Commerce podcast,
Woo.
Orchid.
Woo! Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. And, obviously I'll come all the time if Brian's going to say everything with such energy. That was
So much
fantastic.
energy.
You obviously haven't listened to enough Future Commerce yet, because I tend to get a little yelly on the podcast occasionally. It gets a little
shouty.
wild.
Okay.
shouty.
That's because you're supposed to be drinking energy drinks, but you just drink a nice cab, right? Like that's your energy drink.
No, I drink a lot of things. I think everyone that's watched this show on YouTube knows that I drink a lot of things all the time. I drink a lot of water, and I drink a lot of Nespresso, and I drink a lot of Suja, and I drink a lot of wine.
Wow. Yeah. We stand a beverage king. I think that's what Gen Zers would say.
We stand a
No
beverage
one would ever
king.
say that.
We're
not allowed. I'm
beast.
definitely not allowed to say that. My kids told me that my performance on the podcast is cringe. So
Oof,
go.
that's rough.
Go in life.
Sheesh.
Go in life. Unlock.
I don't.
Yeah,
Just
Dad,
don't
it's a
show
little
my
cringe.
kids it so that
But
they
they
don't say that
listen
to me.
to it though. Like that's sweet. Like that's like part of the battle. They listen to it.
It's like a parlor trick amongst their friends. Well, my dad. Actually, this is how it goes: is my dad knows Mr. Beast. And which is not actually true, which is like a nuance to them. They don't care that I have done things with the Feastables brand in various capacity. Like they're subscribed to us. It's such a weird thing but the way they interpret it is my dad knows Mr. Beast. And then they prove it by showing their friends my YouTube channel. But then they quickly just flash it. They're like, yeah, it's cringe. You don't want to listen to it. You don't want to watch this.
I think it's sweet. That's all we can ever aspire to. Is that they even talk about us, right?
Yes,
that's true.
That's it. The
It's
fact
so
that you're
true.
talking about you is that's a win.
I think I often think back, Brian, you probably already know this, but I've never told you this, Orchid, that there is I think John Adams quote that says, "I must study politics and war so that my sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy." And then like he goes on, like my sons have to study mathematics and philosophy and geography and natural history so that their kids can study tapestry and poetry and architecture. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, I must study commerce so that my kids can study, creator and influencer dynamics on YouTube. That is my cross to bear.
That's what we're hoping for, though. Like, I'm hoping that by the time my kid goes to college, it's just going to be like YouTube University or Meta University with Professor Zuckerberg in the Metaverse, right?
Is that what you really want, Professor Zuck?
Yeah, kind of. I don't know. I mean, it might just be what was that ongoing spoof in The Simpsons where Walt Disney just had his head cryogenically frozen?
That's right, yeah.
And at some point he was going to be defrosted. It's kind of like that. I think it would be a digital human Zuckerberg. Like, I don't think it'd be like actually Mark, because we don't even know what's going to happen post Cage Match.
Shoot.
That's true. Yeah, metahuman brains in jars. That's been my guiding light, Orchid, for a few years now, has been the idea of I want to tiptoe up to the line of the far future. what is the society in a commerce society in the far future look like? But you can't actually say the words out loud. You just have to get people, you have to do the thing where you say 3/4 of the rhyme and let them finish it in their head. But you've literally built metahumans, so you're actually the perfect person to talk about some of this stuff. Actually, for people who aren't aware, you have literally built like metahuman campaigns in your past role as an innovation lead at Nestle.
Yeah, head of digital innovation and strategy at Nestle USA.
And those are all big important words. But what would you say you did there?
What is it that you do here? That's like very much a scene from Office Space. So, yeah, I was part of the Center for Marketing Excellence. So, within large co's, you usually have some kind of center of excellence, which is effectively an internal consultancy. My role when I started at Nestle, and I was there for about 6 years, I started as the digital strategist over the ice cream portfolio. And a lot of that was working in between agencies and the brands to make sure things
Hmm.
were aligned to strategy, to best practices, and really ask the tough questions of the agency and just be that internal partner for the brand teams. And over time, I moved from the ice cream portfolio to the full Nestle USA portfolio, which is about a portfolio of about 40 brands. So think Coffee Mate, Starbucks at Home, Hot Pockets, DiGiorno, not Nespresso, unfortunately. That's a separate
That's a whole other
entity.
thing.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. Sorry, Brian, I can't get you a discount.
Dang it.
Um, and then it also
Dang it.
included Toll House. So, in the role of leading digital innovation and strategy, it was very much, hey, like what is going on out there in the world of technology, the intersection of technology and marketing that, we as Nestle at the time really should be looking at. What are some alphas and betas that our platform partners are putting out? Like, what is Meta doing? What is Pinterest doing? What should we be testing? And then, depending on how the test netted out, is that something we should be scaling across our portfolio? And so a lot of the work was done with the platform partners, but then there was also the work of, hey, what's coming down the pike where we would use different external partners and startups to try to create. And so the Toll House Digital Human initiative came out of that. There was no platform partner. The genesis of that project came about was that we were doing a project around getting better consumer insights. And when you are the largest food and beverage company in the world, the brand marketers don't engage with actual consumers on a day to day basis. All of that is relegated to customer service, which is effectively thought of as a cost center, no matter where you are. And so we wanted to flip the script and say, all right, from a cost center, can it be an insights generator? These are the only people within the company who actually talk to our customers day to
Right.
day.
Right.
And so we went down this path of saying like, okay, like what's there,
What
right?
if we also didn't talk to them and let a computer talk to them?
Okay. I see where you're going with this, but let me get there. So it
Okay. All right.
actually, Ruth, the digital human, actually started as a voice skill because those were all the rage, right?
Right.
Right.
So we're like, okay, well, of the questions that we usually receive from customer service, there are large categories and large themes. Of course, there's, expiration date, there's is this gluten free, like that sort of thing. But there were these complex questions around, hey, like I want to substitute, regular flour for almond flour. Like, how do I do that? And so there was a large enough volume of that coming through where we said, okay, like, can that be a voice skill? And voice skills are they're just annoying to develop because it's not like you're just developing it for one platform. You have to develop it for multiple platforms. So now you're doing it for Siri, now you're doing it for Alexa, and I'm just setting off everybody's
Yeah.
voice
Oh, for sure.
devices, by the way.
Hey,
Hey
Google.
Siri, download Infinite Shelf.
Yes.
Done. We hacked it.
We
That's
did
called
it.
hacking. That's called hacking. Oh my gosh. Oh no, she is. She's doing it.
You growth
Okay.
hacked yourself.
It's
That is
I didn't
unfortunately the
show you.
lesson.
It popped for me too when I said,
Perfect.
"Okay, Google." It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's perfect. So
Can you
we
put this into an ebook and sell this?
Yeah,
That's like
it's a
that
playbook. This is the
feels like a
playbook.
thing that you could be
The
able.
case
Sorry. Go
study
back. So you,
is
most ebooks should just be a tweet,
that's
honestly.
true, and most tweets shouldn't exist.
True.
And won't because Twitter
boom.
may not exist
They
in the
should
near
be
Yeah,
future.
threads.
threads.
Yeah, they should be
Yeah.
threads. But I digress. Okay, sorry. So
We'll get
you're
there.
down this
We'll
path
get
of
there.
building on this idea of like, okay, voice assistance and skills in voice
Right.
are actually kind of like this multi-channel, multi-platform initiative that's really annoying.
Yeah, because then it's just like developing apps for different platforms. Like you have to any kind of version release you have to do an for another one.
Of course.
And part of it too is that baking is always going to be a multimodal experience. So in addition to reading, like hearing it, you also have to see it. So then we're like, okay, well, do you use one of the devices that has a screen and voice? And then we're like, okay, well, this is getting a little too complex. I don't think there's the user experience that we like. And so this is really kind of when digital humans were all the rage the first time around. I want to say about what, 4 years ago at this
Yeah.
point. And so we're like, okay, well, this is an experience that involves high empathy. Is there a way that we can personally embody what the brand should look like, should sound like if you were to engage with someone who's an ambassador of the brand? And influencers tend to be challenging because you're dealing with, like, well, mostly, if I can be very candid, 20-year-olds who make poor life decisions, and all of a sudden your multi-billion dollar brand is like dependent on how this person decides to act in their normal lives.
Go
I'm
on.
just saying. It's true. It's true. So, so we said, okay,
Oh my gosh.
well, if we were to create an ambassador for the brand, what would she look like? What would she sound like? What is the kind of experience that she could enable? So I think that's on like the marketing brand
Could we give her a
experience, like
biblical
high.
name of some kind?
No,
Like
she's
what's
named after Ruth Wakefield, who is the founder of Toll House.
I got it.
We didn't name her Eve, okay?
Wow.
Although in hindsight, no, I'm just kidding. And so, it was a very fun project, but at the heart of it was, how can we serve more customers, right, through a connected and consistent experience while utilizing technology? And obviously using all of that information to make the product better, to make the experience better, things like that.
One thing that comes up over and over again, Brian opened up saying, oh, we're at the intersection of culture and commerce. I think that there's a meta narrative in that too, is how experimental consumer brands can be in finding new ways to connect with their customers, but doing so in a way that, okay, we're going to check a bunch of boxes here. There's the you're going to learn a little bit about the history and the trivia of this brand that you may never have gone to seek or search out yourself. I would never have known Ruth's background, but now I've learned it because I'm getting that through the lens of an experience that is trying to solve a problem. But I'm also learning something and becoming. When I learn something about a brand, maybe I find something deeper to identify with. Maybe it personifies it a little bit. But the other thing is, we all kind of know what's happening here, right? This idea that there's a subtext of you're interacting with something that's not trying to pass as human, right? You're offloading some operational repetitive operational work so that you can have humans that need to do real human things and answer real human questions that require logic and reasoning beyond that of which you could program into a computer or set of prompts. Like, I think that customers are really hip to those things now and actually appreciate the fact that companies are finding creative ways and new ways to experiment to make those interesting, even
Yeah,
if they're
like
like
there was
maybe they're
this
not
one
successful,
company
but they're
that, like,
novel, right?
they were like, I wonder what would best represent our brand. And they had these word processors, and they're like, a paperclip would be.
I love Clippy. I am a Clippy stan. I think Clippy was ahead of their time because I don't really think Clippy is gendered. You know what I mean? But no, I mean, I think it's
I'm with you.
similar where you have.
What does Clippy's OnlyFans say that Clippy identifies as? Let's see.
Oh, I don't know. Does Clippy have an OnlyFans? Is
Could.
Microsoft
Probably.
that cool?
Should.
I would. There would
Microsoft's
be
so
respect.
far ahead of everything, and they always fail as a result. That's the problem.
They're just lapping themselves at this point.
They lap
don't-
themselves. Yes.
That's the lapping themselves content is exclusive to OnlyFans subscribers, though. Is the problem.
I will say when humans are looking for a problem or for someone to solve their problems, there is a generational gap between wanting to speak to a human and just wanting your thing resolved. And so I think Amazon does this really well in terms of their live chat within their app. Like, they have so many prompts that are automatically programmed based on the massive amount of data that they have.
Yeah.
That it's like a pretty good experience. They're like, hey,
Mhm.
you're not reaching out to see how my day is. You're reaching out because either your package was stolen or you want to make a return or whatever that is. And so you want to get in and out as quickly as possible. You want to resolve that issue. Like, what you do not want is for it to escalate. And Philip, I think to your point about, yes, we need to free up human time away from the repetitive questions like, is this nut free? Like, that is a very easy answer to, or question to answer. And the humans really need to be have their time freed up in order to do the human things. And so a big point of
Yes.
inspiration for me was from the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson.
Wow. Okay. That was
Yeah,
that's
memory unlocked.
prescient now, because
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
So the one of the key scenes, and this movie is years old, so if this is spoiler alert, like, this is on you. But like, one of the last scenes, right, is that Phoenix is asking Scarlett Johansson, who's this AI, who's been talking, been having this like deep emotional connection with, because she's literally in his ear, and he says, this is really special to me. Like, how many of these other conversations are you having? She's like, well, I'm having like hundreds of thousands of other conversations, but like only about 3,000 that are as meaningful as this. And I think that, and that's like a whole other thing that we could unpack. But I thought what was so interesting about that was that when we talk about the personalization of marketing messages, when we talk about personalization of marketing experience, like all these things, it's like, oh, this, if you use technology, right, like you can infinitely have more relationships and connectivity and serve more customers than your human constraints of the nature of having one person having one conversation at a time.
Are you familiar with Dunbar's number? So Dunbar's
Well,
number.
Dunbar is actually my VP of finance, so I'm familiar with his number. But I think we're actually talking about different Dunbars.
Different Dunbar. I actually, by the way, we do need to talk a little bit about like the shift into the agency world, because I'm
Yes.
fascinated about that. But Dunbar's number, for those who aren't hip, is sort of shorthand for this theory that sociologist, I think Richard Dunbar, came up with, that there's a theoretical maximum number of human relationships that you could maintain. And that number is artificially small because human cognition was developed organically through evolution to very small groups of people. And we haven't necessarily evolved beyond that. How do I know? Because just look at society; they're not terribly evolved. This idea is is that there's a low number of relationships you can maintain, and the way that we have sort of extended that into the commerce space is that, well, what happens when every brand is vying for that relationship? And I guess the question is, can you foresee a future, Orchid, where people do have true parasocial relationships with brands, or maybe these creations of brands that have some that mean something on a personal level to them? Or is that something that they cosplay as
Oh my gosh.
because it makes them interesting or unique or quirky? Because I tend to think it's more the latter. I have a middle schooler who has made her whole personality about French fries, who lives in my house. And I don't think she actually cares about French fries all that much, but she thinks it's funny and it's a meme that she's perpetuating. And she will keep that up for as long as she lives, as far as she's concerned today. And that's how I think people actually participate with brands, is that there's a role they're playing. It's more cosplay than anything else. But I'm curious what you think about like that kind of work. Is it just an interesting earned media opportunity, or are you actually trying to hit on a real relationship at some point in making
I
that sort of investment? Yeah.
I think in the short term, definitely a media play, because there's always
Mhm.
some benefit to first mover advantage and to demonstrate that you are innovative and that your brand wants to try new things. Because from a business perspective, there are so many brands, even pre Nestle, that I worked on that were legacy brands, where the reality was that their major client base, which was boomers, like they weren't buying more of the product. They had bought all the product that they could. Right. And there is still a limitation as the average human lifespan. And so they weren't getting additional customer growth out of that generation. So they needed to start to find younger pastures like millennials, right? And so they needed to market in a different way so that not everybody was the Steve Buscemi meme of carrying a skateboard saying hello fellow kids, right? Although I feel like that almost every day because I work with a lot of Gen Zers. So I think that there is a way what brands tend to do, especially legacy brands, when they're trying to recreate or reinvent themselves, is that you have to continue to message to the people who are buying your product, but also message to the people who you want them to think about you differently, but not so differently to alienate the people who are actually driving volume.
Hmm.
So I think that with the Toll House case, right? The reality is like most of the customer base, I mean, they buy very heavily during the holidays. It's grandmothers or, probably not grandfathers. I don't mean to be sexist, but like grandmothers baking with their kids generally. And so, or with their grandkids. And so Ruth and this digital human that we created with a company called Soul Machines. So, what that was that it was covered in Vice, right? It was picked up in these publications that like kind of leaned into the fact that like, hey, this could be cool, but there's
Mm.
also this thing as uncanny valley, which hasn't been solved yet. We weren't trying to solve it. But I'm pretty sure I can tell you my mother and my mother-in-law who are in their late 60s, they're not reading Vice, right? Like that article is not going to alienate the way that they think about the
Mhm.
brand. And so you do have to do both. Now, to answer your question about do we expect to build a deep, meaningful brand experience? I think that relationship is only like you can only pull it off if you're like one of like three brands in the world. I don't
Mm.
I don't think that I don't think that a lot of people are out there to have like a deep relationship with their brand. I think it's very dependent on the category. I think it's very dependent on switching costs. Like it kind of there's all those things that are dependent on it. I do think a lot of brand marketers, because they spend so much time thinking about their brand, they're like customers are going to think about us just as much. I was like, the hell they will.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I do
that's
think you have to be honest about what are you trying to do out here? Like, are
Yeah.
you trying to provide a human good or are you trying to sell some product?
It's interesting that you would say that. I think the the question is that is content taking up the same level of space as like a human relationship would, and replacing our brain space or emotional energy around it, even if we're not thinking about it the same way. So like um the parasocial relationship, does it carry just as much weight with us
hmm.
as like an actual relationship does, and it does it take up the same space?
I think
um
so. I
yeah,
mean, have you
yeah,
followed Scandival? I
yeah.
mean, but seriously, like if you draw a parallel between, people who are obsessed and rabid sports fans and following
Hmm.
the lives of their favorite
Yes.
athletes, and then also like for me personally, like following the housewives or following Vanderpump Rules, and like they, these influencers and these creators, like they take up like if you think about the space and time that I spend in various platforms and you get invited into their lives in a way that feels very genuine to you,
Hmm.
like I know more about what's happening with them than some of my friends, right?
Hmm.
And so it's like, and you end up spending more time talking about it because it is this like cultural zeitgeist where you're like, everybody's talking about it. So like this is part of a community. So I do think that there is an opportunity and also like a watch out that a lot of those fake relationships can take up more mental space than the real
I
relationships that you're
think
creating.
I think it's
Hmm.
super interesting. So a thought struck me much earlier as we started getting into this. And I do wonder, and this is just wild for me to think about, and I'm just going to say it on the podcast because this is where my brain goes in a conversation like this. If because there are so many relationships to manage, if we will in the future have digital amalgamations of people that will sort of be proxies for like for sets of friends, like we have like individual units that are
I'm not
online.
high enough for this, I don't think.
I know I'm pushing
So can
into
I
the
give you an
limits.
example?
Yeah, go ahead.
So
I
I
like this.
have I have two friends that I text about new technologies.
Yes.
The three of us were just chatting about Threads this morning. And we're like, okay, like you were on Mastodon, you were on Blue Sky, like where do we think like, Threads is like, yo, why are you so hyped on Threads? I see you posting, why are you being so thirsty, right? So like that is a friend group.
Hmm.
I've got another friend group where we only text about Bravo, right? Like any of the
Hmm.
shows on Bravo, like, hey, Scandival broke. Did you see that new thing? Like, so it's like it's interesting because I get what you're saying in terms of you self-organize your personal relationships into content categories or even like entertainment categories. You think would be like, oh, well, these are my like technology friends. Like
Yeah.
these are my like
Yes.
trashy TV friends,
Totally.
right?
No, that's actually you're
But isn't
dead
that
on.
natural? Isn't that like
It
how it's always been? Or is it
is
was
it?
more it was no, I think it was more of like, oh, we went to the same high school and we didn't like
Right.
move out of like 5 mile radius of where we grew up.
Maybe that's part of it. I do think maybe there's a nature. There are, something we wrote about in the multiplayer brand, which is a new zine out
Oh, this
by
one?
Future Commerce. Yeah, there it is. That's the one. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. Thank you. Wow, gosh, do I hold my copy up? Dare I? It's here. I promise. Hold on. There it is. Okay. Um,
Yay!
but 100 pages,
I got
$20, free
extra. I
shipping,
got extra.
visions.futurecommerce.com. But something we wrote about here is this idea of, well, why does critique of a brand exist? And I sort of drew this dotted line between the idea that brands move so quickly and they demand so much of us in such short periods of time in the modern era that maybe critique arises as a defense mechanism for us to slow them down. We find fault with them in the same way that you would in a human relationship to say, hey, like you're moving way too fast here. Like I am not ready for this level of commitment you're asking me to. You're going to throw
Don't ask me
down.
to help you move.
We're
Exactly.
too old for that.
But there is I think those are natural reactions and like human behaviors that you don't necessarily examine, but you just follow your instinct. And your instinct says, I have to aggregate the amount of information and friends groups based on things like topical analysis of technology trends, because that is my defense mechanism of being bombarded with messages and imagery all day long. I also think sometimes there are people that fall in love with their pillow, and you're gonna have weird things that happen in
Yikes.
the world where it's like, in fact, so many people fall in love with their pillow every year. There's like Google autocomplete results about like, is it normal to love a pillow? Why am I emotionally attached to my pillow? Like, if you can make a decision as your brand that you build for the for the relationship that you idealize with your customer, that you wish that they have, and then there will be people that always take it too far too, and too literally, and you don't want that either. So it's somewhere in the middle of like this intimacy, or it's fan, but not necessarily a fanatic. And that's where, I don't know.
There's so
Is
many
it
jokes I
possible?
could make
Yeah.
right now, and I'm just
I
gonna
guess
stop.
the question to you, since you have built brands, Orchid, is like, um, is that something you can even like set out purposely to try to engineer? It's like, it just happens and you have no control over it. And, customers are going to make your brand into whatever they want it to be. And sometimes you benefit and sometimes you don't.
Well, I mean, that's like on the cynical end of the spectrum. I think that you control some of it, but there's a lot that you don't control. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Is that when someone truly feels that they connect with a brand's ethos, that they want to be a part of it, right? They want to be able to shape it. They want to be able to interpret it in a way that fits their worldview. And I think that's okay. Um, and I think that that is a large, I think we talked about this at Visions during Vision Summit a little bit as well, which is that this is the nature of media, is that we went from very push, right? Very much the brand is what the brand tells you it is, and you have no way to speak back to it because it is, you are only engaging with it through a magazine ad, through a TV ad, through radio.
Yeah.
And then with the rise of social media, now you can talk back to brands, and now brands on Twitter, better or worse, like have a voice, they can answer back, they can engage. And I think too, and come with me on this journey, is that I think people are asking way more of brands and corporations than they ever have. And I think it's because the government isn't doing a lot of what it should do, right? Or when you talk about
Mm-hmm.
income inequality, when you talk about, rents going up, when you talk about all these things. And so that's why it's like it feels like over the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of people are saying, hey, corporations should be doing more. They should be, taking me across state lines so that I can go to, like a healthcare clinic or whatever it is. Like they're looking like because there's a deficiency in the services that the government is providing or a frustration around that.
Right,
I think people
exactly.
are looking at to the private sector. And so I think all of those things between the rise of social media, between, just asking more of corporations, I think that's where people want to engage. And that's why there is critique because there is a higher expectation of how brands and companies conduct their business.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
with corporations leading the way, it's like
Like our
if
company's
you
people, right?
yeah,
Is
are
that
you
like that's like the funny meme? I don't know. Are they?
well, and even more than that, are they like sort of is there if you engage with them enough, do you start to become sort of a digital citizen of the corporation? Like our
A
customers,
shareholder?
yeah, our customers also like a customer's employee is sort of on equal footing in some
Hmm.
ways. They're by buying something or taking money from something, you're on the you're on both sides of the same coin, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, you're a part of it, and so
Maybe it's
at a
even
scale,
deeper,
yeah,
Brian.
yeah, maybe
Like,
I
even
think people
steeper.
are looking for meaning in all the wrong places, but that's just my
yeah,
very
looking for
True.
love and meaning in all the wrong places.
yeah.
One last little thought about that, and then maybe we can shift gears. But I think that you're really onto something really profound, Orchid. There's a power that the customer base has with a brand that exceeds the amount of power that its own employees have in its organization now. I think that there is a organized labor as a thing is coming back. We're seeing it in small ways all over, at least in the United States, in various types of jobs. Uh, but those are small scale efforts when you compare that to, say the Snyder Cut, right? You have concerted efforts that take place in organized efforts to lobby against a brand, whether it's a media brand or a basketball team or a football organization. Customers and fans have an unbelievable amount of power that outweigh the collective bargaining capabilities of the workforce. And I wonder if
Mm,
that's a fundamentally modern problem that
mm.
we've never really said out loud, but we all sense to be true. Um, and something I wish that I had thought about before we wrote The Multiplayer Brand by Future
I
Commerce.
have a lot of thoughts about that. I mean, I think part of it is that I think we're all about the same age. I know Brian, you're a spring chicken. So you know what? We're
True.
like the Philip and I are the millennial Gen X cuspers. And I
Yeah.
think that because there was little information shared. I mean, we remember when the internet was launched. Okay. And so we lived through the infancy of it. I was on Prodigy. I was on AIM. Like, like there
Hmm.
were all these things. Like Facebook started when I was a sophomore in college. And so I think that we were genuinely exploited to a certain degree in our career, wrapped up in like the myth of capitalism. I mean, capitalism is a very real thing, but it's like, of if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you can achieve anything.
Hmm.
And I think that we kind of went along with it. Right. And I think that now that we're in positions of power, and now you have Gen Zers and even, Gen Alpha with all the world's information at their fingertips, we're saying like, hey, that didn't work out so great. That caused a lot of the inequality that we are facing now. And so, we have genuine concerns and we want to be a part of this, but we also need to feel like the time that we invest here is worth it. And we're interested in building something together. Because I will say that I think a lot of people will take criticism at saying, like, hey, like, if you're criticizing this, you don't want to be here. And I don't think that's true. I think it's very much like voting. Like if you are willing to take the time and the energy to say like, "Hey, I believe in this thing, but I believe that it can be better. Here's what I want to do. I'm going to take this time to organize all these folks because we actually believe in the thing. Like we are actually trying to fight for a situation where we stay here,
Mm.
right? I think that that is still a very good thing versus people just checking out because it is a free market. If they didn't want to work there, they wouldn't, right? And so I do think like this critique is actually very, I think it's actually like very loving in a way, right? It's
Mm.
saying like, "Hey, this is my perspective. This is what I expected, and this is where you're falling short." Now it's the organization's prerogative to say, "All right, I hear you. Is this something that I want to do? Is this something that I don't want to do based on my
Hmm.
goals and based on, my limitations?" And I think it's okay to have that discourse and that dialogue. I
Right.
think
Or
that's
like what
good.
99% of my customers say, and you're like the 1% saying, yeah, this doesn't fit what I thought it
Sure.
would. Like all of a sudden, like, yeah, I think critique's amazing in that sense. Um,
It still
it's,
hurts. I
yeah,
don't wanna pretend like, actually receiving critique is easy. It is not easy.
It's not easy, right? And I think the expectation for a lot of knowledge work, which is, you know, has been my career path, has been tending more towards putting yourself out into the world and inviting critique, whether
Mm,
implicitly or explicitly, but without the understanding that that's actually what we have done over the last 20 years,
mhm.
right? And when you're inviting people's perspectives and opinions and you're not prepared to receive them, I think that's where a lot of the modern challenges over, um, yeah, that comes back to Dunbar's number, is like, how many of these relationships do you really care about,
Mhm.
and
yeah.
how many of these opinions do you really need to solicit?
Speaking of Dunbar's number and inviting critique and all of the above, well, Zuck just dropped Threads. uh, it seems like all of the parasocial relationships that have been built up on Twitter and Instagram are filtering directly into like a combined world. You combine Instagram and Twitter, and you get Threads. At least that's sort of the feeling that I get. Copy the feature set of Twitter and bring over all of your Instagram
Nah,
followers.
it's just version 1 of Facebook, but, what I'll do is I'll actually use Threads as a parallel for my career,
Hmm.
okay? So, because I was very much at my job was to look at the forefront of technology and say, okay, what can we bring in? Like, let's imagine the future. Like, what do we need to do now in order to get there? Let's imagine what that can be. And I would parallel that with, Facebook's change to Meta, right? Or in their focus on the metaverse is that they're looking forward. They're saying like, hey, this is where we're gonna go. We're gonna start building there. But what they found was that innovation, when it's too far out and it's not actually tied to business impact, like you can't actually survive as a business. And customers aren't there's such a niche group of customers and users who are interested in that that you don't get everybody on board, not right away. And so, like, my pivot to, hey, agency side, now I came agency side, so kind of coming full circle, but into an operations role of managing the P&L, of developing people, of, making sure the service is excellent, is kind of like where Meta's like, hey, listen, yeah, like we do still believe that the metaverse is the future. We still believe that innovation is important. But we also got a company to build. And we talk about, brass tacks like user growth and business growth and share price and the opportunity. Threads is very pragmatic. Is it bright and shiny and new and never been done before? Absolutely not. But Facebook was very, very well positioned because they had a strong social graph. They had a lot of distrust and of Twitter that they could use to their advantage,
Yeah.
right? And they needed to find something novel, right? That wasn't a TikTok competitor or a TikTok clone. They had to find something novel that they were uniquely positioned to deliver on. And so that's why you had the pivot from like a lot of talk about the metaverse to all of a sudden they have released a product. And I would say one of the most successful product releases in modern history,
Yep.
but now they've released a product that is not shiny, it is not new, it is not innovative, but it works. And it works for the people in this time.
And
And that's the metaphor for your career. I
I was
like
going to
that.
say, as
Yeah.
a
I love
metaphor for
that.
your career, is that, like, do you see that move to agency side as having all the same parallels? Because it that feels like, I see it a little differently, having, helped build a digital agency, and it's choosing a different kind of hard.
Yeah.
Um, And
Well, the way that I see it is more of like, hey, it's my career pivot from innovation to business operations.
I see.
It
And
is
that's
Mm,
not as,
tying
like,
it to the
sexy on the tin, right?
no,
It's not
it's
right.
not. It's not. And I think some people will understand it, not everybody will. But innovation and like putting pretty decks together and imagining the future is really fun, but I wanted to create business impact. I wanted to know that the
mhm,
actions that I was taking and the decisions I was making the company a better and stronger place, both financially and in a way where where it's repeatable, scalable, right? Like I wanted something that was a
Mhm.
little more tangible. And I also knew that managing a P&L was just like not something that I was really doing to any significant degree. And I also am like old enough to know that if you want to succeed in business and thrive in capitalism, which is what it is, like you have to be tied to the numbers and what you're doing at work has to be tied to the numbers somehow.
Yeah. And nothing is more measurable, in the agency model than, your gross margin, and your, being on pace for on a recurring basis for delivering value for your client. Those things are
Yeah.
measurable, and you can see a pretty quick return on, or pretty quick data that supports hypotheses around things that need to change or be altered, course correct, that sort of thing. Do you agree with that? Number one. Number two, like, is that part of the, like, allure or the nature of the business, is that you can see a pretty tight
mhm.
turnaround, whereas maybe in large consumer brands, it's a much longer payback period or a much longer time
Yeah.
before you start to see the efforts of your work?
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously, whatever decisions you make when it comes to your career are ultimately going to be selfish. And so part of it is like, well, what do I want to be known for? Like, I'm not going to give a TED talk on like a digital human. Like, sure, that's fun, but I want to be known for being someone who does meaningful work, right? Who builds businesses, right? And like, that's what I wanted to be known for. And so, like, I think, like, to your point as well, like, yeah, I think it is about like the pragmatism and like being able to show demonstrable results and impact in a measurable time. Because I think about when I think about careers and work, I think about it in terms of like effort versus impact. And when you're in innovation, some in a large organization, I've talked to other folks in other organizations who had very, very similar roles. One of the refrains is that it's a very, very high effort, but minimal business impact. High
Mm.
effort meaning if you're trying to sell the future, like there you are out front. And so you do have to get
Mhm,
buy-in from all
mhm.
levels, right? Especially now when every dollar is scrutinized. And so that turns into like 12, 15, 20 versions of a deck and to stakeholder management. And you're saying like, hey, like this is the important thing. But like if a factory breaks down and now they have to invest over there, like there goes your project. And so when you think about it, it was like high effort, minimal impact, because I don't even know if this is going to get bought in. Like you kind of get like from 1 to 5 big projects a year. And so now, like every single day, I can see the impact of my work for better, for worse,
Mhm.
because you're going to, as a leader, like you're going to make decisions that you feel like were right at the time based on the information that you have. But in hindsight, like maybe it wasn't quite the right decision.
Yeah, innovation's hard. I think that's what I hear you saying. It's like
You have to be a
you
massocist,
you
which
do,
I
you
am.
do. I think, the thing is, like, you back to your, like, digital metahuman example, you had to you're like, oh, well, why don't we create a voice assistant? Okay, well, actually, we have to create a voice assistant across 4 platforms, and every time we update one of them, we have to update all of them. And oh wait, this needs a visual component as well, and it's just like just long it just yeah, long tail expenses. These are just expenses that keep piling up, and in time frame extends, and it just gets wild. And you're like, and then you have people asking, how is this actually benefiting the business?
Yeah. They're like, I
And
don't want this to
yeah,
be a science experiment.
right.
Well, and I totally understand that perspective when, especially when things seem uncertain, Like, I don't know how we'll actually mythologize this moment in American economic history when we look back. Is that we were much ado about nothing? Question mark. I don't know. I'm not sure how we'll. If maybe there's another shoe that has to drop. Like maybe there's something that just hasn't happened yet.
Or it could be aliens. We don't talk about
Could
aliens.
be
Apparently they exist.
aliens. First contact. It could be a lot of things that could be the uh, uh, yeah, something that's a catalyst for, that fulfills all of our anxiety and worry in this moment. Um, what I do know is the future doesn't build itself, right? And typically, there was a model around this in sort of the innovator's dilemma, and this idea of how businesses become generational and cultural businesses over time, and reinvent themselves. And just to bring it back to, I don't think that there is a clearer example of a business that was pre-web 2.0, social media 1.0, that has been able to stay relevant and culturally significant than Facebook, Meta, Instagram.
In fact,
The
Yeah.
well, it's
reinventing
interesting.
themselves and reinventing the modern web at least 2 to 3 times, making the leap from web and web 2.0 to app, to the new social media, to influencer creator, to short form video. They have stayed with it. Um,
As of
and
like
yeah,
6 months ago, everyone in this country was like, Facebook is dying.
yeah, but
I don't but
that's because
I
they
disagree with that.
misheard Zuck. They heard him say metaverse. He was saying Threadaverse. You just couldn't understand.
He was muffled.
um yeah, I mean,
And
I think it's interesting though, because I moved from San Francisco last year to Detroit now, the suburbs of Detroit. And so my life has changed dramatically from
Hmm.
always being in large city centers and like very tech focused to being in, like, I live a very suburban life. And I got to tell you, Facebook groups is so incredibly strong, especially when you have school age children. Like, there are so many, like, I deleted Facebook for a very long time and I was mad that I had to reinstall it when I got here. But I don't believe, I think, yes, if you talk, well, I mean, it's not coastal elites. I'm kind of saying that in tongue in cheek, but like, I think there is a certain set of folks who are like, Facebook's dying, like it's not going to be the same. But like, I think a lot of people also forget that it is so ingrained in a lot of people's lives in a way that it is their only connection to their community outside of just walking down and talking to your neighbors.
Uh-huh. It's there's a stranglehold that I think that all of these modes of communication have in the way that we develop taste now, which is very relevant, conversation. Is our tastes and preferences inform what we buy and how we buy it. And those are, to get the heady part of this and what we do at Future Commerce is that is part of like the cultural affectation of how people belong and behave.
Mm.
So if what we buy and how we buy it is informed by who we are and how we behave, then those places are more digital and more controlled by a handful of companies. And that's where it happens. It happens in, yes, maybe in Reddit to some degree, maybe on Pinterest to some degree, but the way that people connect are on the handful of platforms that we all know and can cite. It's and maybe in of diminishing importance, Twitter to some degree, but I think preferences and
is it
tastes
though?
are formed on Instagram. Uh, to quote our friend Ruby Taylor, the tyranny of images. Well, that is Instagram's tagline, basically. And
The
so,
I
tyranny of
would
image.
actually really respect it if they changed it to that.
It would be way
mad
cooler.
respect,
Yeah.
mad respect. Instagram by Meta.
But yeah, I mean, I think a large part of my career shift too was to be more bullish in
Hmm.
e-commerce, right? In commerce, like in
Ooh, yeah.
because
Say more
and
about
so
that.
yeah, because like another thing that I was doing, so as like head of digital innovation, part of it is, yes, digital marketing experiences, but part of it was also new business models. And so D2C was a very new business model for a legacy company that largely deals like wholesale with like wholesale customers. And so I built up the capabilities internally to be able to do that, thinking that it wasn't about volume, because anytime you look at a pure play D2C, or even looking at D2C as a revenue generator within a large company that's largely wholesale, it ends up being a rounding error in
Yeah.
terms of like the amount of revenue that you actually get through that channel, for a variety of reasons, which we actually talk about on Infinite Shelf. And that's been really fun. But I wanted the e-commerce, like the digitally native companies, were able to engage with and connect with customers in a way, with a speed and agility that you don't see in legacy brands. And that was actually what I was really in love with. And I think a lot of people too, when you think about the brands that you want to support, with a lot of these founder led, very founder visible brands, you believe in their dream. And it's kind of like, it's like, it allows you to believe in the American dream again, right? Which is that you can do anything. You can be in a garage with like another guy and like, no money, right? And create a company out of nothing.
Hmm.
Is that true? I don't really. We can get into it, but I think it's a mirage. I think the American dream, for a lot of reasons, is different now. And I think the
Hmm.
reality is very different from, maybe what our parents were sold on. But I think just seeing these like founders' passions and being able to really understand their business to a deeper level and create that business impact, like that's why I wanted to focus on e-commerce. And there's a lot of reasons I went to Common Thread Collective in order to do that, partially because of, the way that we think about a client's business. We're not just about media spend. It's about accurately financially forecasting the business to create growth, like true profitable growth for an e-commerce business.
Hmm.
So taking into account CAC and cost of goods sold and everything that goes
All the
into all that.
things,
Yeah, exactly.
all the
Yep.
things.
Every acronym.
Yep.
You mentioned Infinite Shelf. When you're thinking about the content that you're creating there, who are you speaking to? Like, who's the muse of a listener of Infinite Shelf, and how can we,
Oh,
you know,
that's a
because
great question.
I think you have the two of you, both Ingrid and yourself, Orchid. You have this vantage point of experience in so many different brands, especially in like cultural brands, that I think it's rare to have that kind of firepower in the hosting chair duties of a podcast
Yeah.
these days. Because what you have now is a bunch of, it's very easy for anyone to spin up a podcast. So, yeah, give us the pitch a little bit,
You held back
as
there, Philip.
evidenced by
You held back there.
the fact that Brian and I have a
Yeah.
podcast.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
I was really drawn to Infinite Shelf and to Ingrid in particular, because it felt like our careers kind of started at opposite ends and kind of intersected, and we passed each other. And so she started at a digitally native company, went big enterprise. And then I've always worked at very large companies and kind of went the other direction. And she started in ecom, and now, I'm coming over to ecom. So I just felt like we had very similar but different experiences where we could actually give a more holistic view or holistic opinion or stance on how we view marketing and what works and what doesn't in our experience. So I think, like, from the vantage point perspective, it was really interesting. And I think, like, for our audience, it really is people who are passionate about marketing and building a business online, or even like, and it's not even building a business online. I think it's about having like a part of their company be digitally enabled or pure
Hmm.
play e-commerce. Because a lot of what I've noticed, through my work and just through networking with founder communities, is that like no one, well, maybe I won't say no one. I think there are very few instances where someone starts a business because they're like, you know what, the margins are great on this and there's a white space opportunity, right? Usually you get some kind of consulting grad who decides to start a business that way. But most of the time, founders start businesses because they were probably creating something for themselves, or they like, there was something that they were passionate about that they started to talk about with other folks, and they realized that it was a problem that they could solve for a lot of people, right? And so, by nature of that, marketing is going to be new to them. Wholesale is going to
Hmm.
be new. Influencer, like, they're learning all these things for the first time because like they really just had this idea that they loved, and now they're trying to build a company around it. And so for us, it's not I don't think we get as dissected as like, oh, we're for like, post product market fit companies, or
Mm,
like we're for like, founders. It's like, no, like we're for people who are interested in e-commerce and all the things that come with it, especially with a bent on marketing and a passion for marketing.
that's great. Infinite Shelf in season 3. Orchid Bertelsen just taking up the co-hosting duties. We really appreciate you having done it.
Mm,
And what a cool thing.
it's so fun.
I don't know how we've figured out how to convince you to hang out with us from time to time, but it's we're forever in your debt.
It gets me out of spreadsheets.
I can appreciate that. I'll do literally anything that anyone asks me to do, if as long as it's distracting me from the real spreadsheet work I need to be doing. Great to have you. Are you on the threads? Where can people find you
I
online?
am on the threads. I'm everywhere. And I think I have the same username everywhere. It's just at Orchid Bertelsen. Largely on Twitter, more on threads, very on TikTok. I'm not posting things, okay? I'm a lurker on TikTok, not that coordinated. I can't look at myself in the camera like, the creators, they just stare at themselves. I can't do it. But you can largely find me on Infinite Shelf, season 3.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We always ask people at the end, what is the future of commerce?
Future of commerce is just multimodal, I think.
Yeah,
I think it's e-commerce is such a funny thing because it's a funny name to me, because it reminds me when social media was considered new media. Remember
yeah,
this?
I
Remember
remember
new
that. Yeah,
media was like Twitter and Facebook, and now it's just media. And I think we're going through the same thing where there's not going to be a delineation of how you do it or where you do it. Like I don't know, commerce is everywhere.
yeah.
Hmm.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Orchid. And thank
Thank
you all
you.
for listening to Future Commerce. You can find more episodes of this podcast and all Future Commerce properties, including Infinite Shelf, at futurecommerce.com. And we're in your inbox respectfully 3 times a week with the analysis and insights that you need to power your business and to see around corners, to see into the future. You can get that all one-stop shop, futurecommerce.com/subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Future Commerce.